Hi, welcome once again to the J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me on this artistic adventure. Today we'll be working with ink, pen and ink. So have your kneaded eraser, a number 2 or an HB pencil handy, and any type of ink that you would like to use. But make sure that it's archival, that it's permanent, that it's black, and a smooth ink. I probably recommend a Pigma Micron pen. They come in various colors and sizes. I like the number 2. And let's start doing some ink drawing.
Okay, first thing we need to do is establish where it's going to go. And we want this thing fairly large. What we want to do is just say, I'm going to have his little rear end almost touch that edge over there. And his head's going to be about right here. I want to give him just a little bit more room on the right side. And if you wanted to, you could like say, well, here's a tail over here. And his little leg is going to kind of come down there. That's his tail. Big fluffy tail. Shoulder comes down in there. So draw it first, and then if it's not right, draw it right, and then erase what's wrong. So that's how big I want it. He's got to be bigger than your hand. I mean, you want it really large. Otherwise, it looks funny. The size of the head, about the size of a softball, and then you've got these little nubs kind of sticking up for his ears. They don't stick too much outside the circle, a little bit. So look at his eyes. His eyes are about right smack dab in the middle of that circle. So wherever you put that circle, if you go right smack dab in the middle, that's about where his eyes are. And come straight down off that first ear you did, and just do a little circle to denote that's where his eye goes. And then at the very bottom of that circle is about where that nose goes. Not quite, but almost. Not quite in between the eyes. Actually, if you go straight down from his left eye, our right eye, if you come straight down from there, that's about where that nose is going to go. Just a tiny little black nose. In fact, the nose is the same size as his eye. So you should have 3 little circles like that. And then his little mouth. We can get that in later. You may want to just denote where his little jaw goes. So come straight down off of that left eye, and you do a little curve and a little U shape. Yeah, break it down into shapes. Break it down into little areas. So your pencil is just a guideline. Remember, everything that you draw with that pencil is going to be erased. So don't get too attached to that drawing. And even the outside edge is really soft and fluffy. And so all that line just tells us where it is, but it's not going to define anything. And really that's about it. The little shadow, the little bit of snow and stuff that's in there, we can do that later. So you want to get rid of your graphite as soon as you can. So I'm going to just start in with my number 2 Pigma Micron pen. And start in with the darkest areas you see. His eyes, his nose, the little areas around his ear. And the fluffy, so this one's for you, Zeta. How you make something fluffy is the softer it is, the less you draw. The softer it is, the less you draw. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by that. So his back, you can see where his back is, but look how soft it is. I'm just going to do these little tiny flecky lines like this. So when you want something really soft and fuzzy, less line. In fact, when you're doing ink, remember, when in doubt, leave it out. The less you draw, the better, because you can always add more. So I'm just doing these little dots and dashes, just going to establish where those little lines are. If you were to draw a line, you could never move it. In this, let's just say, for example, I go in here and I say, this is where my edge goes, and then I look at it and go, oh no, that's not where my edge goes. Well, I can move it, I can bring it back up where it's supposed to be, And nobody knows the difference. This is just texture. But if I draw a line, I can't move it. So don't draw lines. I mean, don't draw continual lines. Little dots and dashes are the key, especially when you're first learning how to draw with ink. Dots and dashes, because you can always add more to it. So just little dots and dashes, and it's almost like connect the dots when we're done. Also, get in the habit of not having to draw in one direction. So what I mean by that is when you're drawing fur or anything else, you may want to say to yourself, oh, there's some that are going this way and some that are coming this way. So you kind of go both ways. The other thing is, don't put the pen so tight to the paper. In other words, just barely touch the surface and you'll get this nice thin feathered line. Little dots and dashes. And just barely touch the paper. In fact, sometimes your line skips and you get part of it and then it skips it because you're touching so lightly. That's what you want. And that is a practice thing. That's not something that comes natural. So just little dots and dashes. And leave things out. You can always add more. When you're going into the eye and the nose they're the darkest areas. So when you've got your courage, go ahead and do an eye. And it's just, in fact, you could do little dots and dashes like this in a circle and just say, okay, is that really where my eye goes? If it's not, you can always move it. But if you do too much line, then it's set forever. So once you're good with it, go ahead and throw that in, nice and round. And he's got this little round, this little dark edge to his eye. So I'm going to throw that little dark edge in there. And he's got these little tear ducts, just dots and dashes. And the more you add, the darker it gets. But he's got this little shine in his eye. So you may want to pick out that shine and say, look, there's his shine. There's that little shine in his eye. It's a little C shape. And then around it is his pupil. And so that's a good start for the eye. But the eye is fairly dark. So I'm just going to hatch through it. Hatch. And I starburst out of the eye. In other words, I don't go all in one direction. I go from the center and go out in a circular pattern. And that gives it the illusion of those striations in the eye. And then just dots and dashes around it until it's as dark as you want it to be. Now remember that when we do these drawing days, I don't expect you to do it perfect. This is all about just teaching you techniques. And those you got to practice on your own if you want to get good at them. It's like anything else. And I may need to go darker with that eye, but right now, I'm just going to leave it that way. Here's the other eye. Little dots and dashes till I'm happy with it. He has a little shine in that eye too, but it's smaller. I'm going to try to pick that out a little bit. Dots are a good way too. When I was in high school, I didn't like the pen. I remember being urged by my art teacher to use a pen. And at that time we used dip pens, and they were a pain, messy, and so So I did an entire piece of dots. That took forever. But it's a good way to draw, especially when you're not really familiar with it. Any of those other little dark areas, like there's a little bit of dark fur that's around his eye, you can just use little tiny dots and dashes to just figure out where those go. You can always come back in later. But I'm just barely touching the surface, just barely. And also when you're doing fur, you don't want to go in the same direction. Some fur flips up, some fur flips down. So get in the habit of doing that little feathered line in various lengths, some long, some short, in various directions. His nose is pretty much like his eye. I'm just going to say, well, okay, right here is a little shine in the nose. And then the nose is fairly dark, so I'm just going to hatch through it. Hatch, 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 hatch. Without drawing a line around it. There's his nose. And now I'm going to hatch the other way. So I've gone this way, now I'm going to go this way. It's called cross-hatching. And in order to make it nice and edgy, I'm going to put little dots and dashes on the edge and just smooth it out without drawing a line around it. I don't want a line around it. I mean, it looks like there's a hard line. If I need to, I can put a little hard line in there too, but just little dots and dashes and just smooth it out. A couple little dots for his tongue. And the tongue, if you wanted to make that tongue a little darker, the dots are perfect for that. So I'm just going to put a couple little dots in there, especially right at the top, where it's a little darker. It's amazing how much value a dot can put into your drawing. A couple little dots. His little jowl on the other side gets lost. In fact, you can hardly even see where it goes. There's a little bit of light right there that kind of shows where it is. It's reflected light. So I'm just going to throw in just a couple little lines in the fur that's beyond, and that will denote that edge. I don't have to draw that edge in. A couple little lines and you got it. Your eye makes that connection. If I got rid of my graphite, get rid of all that graphite, the edge of my nose is defined by these 5 little dots, these 5 little lines there. And you really don't need much more than that. In fact, the same thing with the edge of his fur over here. So light, I mean, there's a couple little dark lines in there. That's what you want to do. Just put a few in there. So I'm just going to define that edge by a couple little dots, little lines. Just define it like this. And these are just little feathered lines. They define that whole edge. If I got rid of my graphite, that whole edge is defined right there. And the less the line, the softer it looks. But I'm not done. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there, but just a few little lines. Sometimes we think that the more line we put in, the better it's going to look. But you can see that's not really true. Alright, well, we can come back to the head. We've got it all defined and everything. Everything is fine there. I do want to get the body. So I'm just going to use little lines to help define that edge. There's a little snow that comes down in there too, so just leave it out. Don't do all your lines the same length. You got to kind of get in the habit of a couple long and a couple short. And I'm barely touching the surface. There is I mean, this is something you got to kind of practice. Where that snow is, just leave it out. That edge of that tail, just leave it out. I don't know if you can see how when I draw it, there are times when I'll stroke it and nothing comes out because I'm not that close. So I have to get just a little closer, but just barely touch that paper. That is a practice thing. Doesn't come natural. And if I wanted to at this point, I could do that little shadow that's there where the snow is. I'm just going to do hatched lines like this. Here's a little shadow as it comes up there. Notice that my lines are not all going in the same direction either. That little bit of variation is going to make it interesting. You can go in and do some dots and dashes, but you need something to say that this is not a solid surface. He's not on a piece of glass. So you need some texture there. It's just dots and dashes. So now I've defined my whole character here, my whole thing, and I can get rid of any graphite that's on there. I'm going to get rid of all that graphite anyway. Let it sit for a minute so your ink dries, and then get rid of your graphite. And those areas that in between that you just left out, those are kind of nice. Just leave them out. Now all that drawing part is gone. Now I can go in and texture that with dots and lines. I'm going to start with the top where the ears are because they're very dark. I can come back into the eyes if I need to. This is what I mean by going both ways. As I draw, I'll draw away and toward myself. But I'm trying to go in the same direction that the fur goes, so that it gives it kind of a furry texture, for lack of a better way to say it. The more line you add, the darker the value. So there's some really dark areas in there. You may want to just go in and really darken that up. Don't be afraid to leave a little bit of stuff out. You don't have to draw every little thing either. If you think, well, I don't really see that, don't draw it in. Or if you do see it, just draw a little bit of it. I'm just going back into it. It's a little grayer. Just add a few lines into it until it's as gray or until it's as black and white as you want it. Just itty bitty little lines, barely touching the surface. Here's that little bit of fur behind him. All you need is just a couple little lines in there. You got it. And if you need more, you can always go back into it and add a little more. So foxes are part of the canine family. A little bit of fur that's right up at the very top that is very light and thin.
Just do a couple little lines there and just leave it out. The more you draw, the heavier it becomes. You want it light and fluffy. Just leave it out. After a while of practicing this, the ink thing, you'll go really fast. But at first, you just kind of slow. When I first draw it, I think, oh, that's dark enough. Then it's not quite so dark. So where some of this is a little darker and in the shadow, you add a little bit more line to this than you would over here. And you got it. Just a few little dots and dashes create that grayness that's there. You don't need much. That edge, I don't want to do anything more on that edge. I want it very soft like that. So I'm just gonna leave it. Don't really need anything else there. Light touch with your pen. So once I put all this texture in it, I look back on it and go, oh, you know what? I need to go darker. I need more in there. That's common for me. I just anticipate it. It's just going to be part of drawing, just the way it is. His head's just about done. Yeah, it's really not a ton there. His eyes need to go a little darker, so I'm just going to put a little dots and dashes in there, just to darken in some of that area. Little dots and dashes. You got it. So his back is quite a bit darker than his front there. And so it's about as much as you've got on this side you're going to need into the back as well. Maybe a little bit more. I'm going to start with those darker areas. And where it's really dark there, it doesn't matter which direction I go. So I've just got to load that with darkness. So I got that really dark down in there, and then now as I come up, I just less line. Still trying to go in the direction the fur is, just less line. And this fur in the back is longer, so my strokes, my line is longer. Up here it's kind of short and small because right over his nose is very short fur. But as you get back in the back, longer fur, lots more fur. The other thing I do is when I really want to draw lightly, I'll go way on the back of my pen and just barely touch the surface. So I just kind of will stroke it like this
You'll get this kind of broken line because you're just barely, and the faster you go, the thinner your line. So you can get some very gray kinds of textures by going way back down your pen. Little broken lines. You'll get that grayness. That's a practice thing too. Doesn't feel right at the beginning, but it works. It also helps you to get a line that isn't all the same, because your pen kind of will move on its own. Last thing you do is the shadow that goes over there, and you don't have to do it all. In fact, if you wanted some of these snow drifts behind it, just very light little shapes, just to say these were little snow drifts back in there. You don't need much. There's not much there anyway. It's all white. Remember, don't always go in the same direction. Sometimes I'll do little fan shapes. Like I'll go this way and then do a little fan shape. Especially if you're doing plants, little bushes and grass clumps and things. That works. Nobody cares if that's in the right place. Just you do need some. You need something there to say, hey, there's a shadow right there. Hopefully that helped. What's the last thing you do? I always sign it. That's your copyright. Always sign it. Hey, thanks for coming along with me today on this little journey. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And remember, art makes life better.